Hello, and welcome to the BlackburnNewsLondon.com debate for the position of Mayor of the City of London. I'm your host and moderator, Scott Kitching, and I'm joined by three of the top four candidates for the Mayorship of London, Tanya Park, Paul Pilato, and Ed Holder. Our debate today is going to focus on four of the key issues that seem to matter most to most voters in London, and those are the economy and job creation, supervised consumption sites and the opioid epidemic, affordable housing, and bus rapid transit. Each candidate will have a chance to start a discussion by answering a question posed by the moderator. Then the candidates will get a chance to debate the issue amongst themselves. But first, each candidate will give an opening statement of approximately 2 minutes. The order was drawn prior to the debate, and first up is Ed Holder.
Well, thanks very much, Scott. Look, since this campaign began, I've been asked why I'm running and who's Ed Holder. And I've been running and I've decided to run because of a great sense of duty that to me started at a young age and really has extended to my last 37 years living in London. I've been involved in business and politics and community service. And I think those are important components for anyone looking to consider this role as mayor. From a business standpoint, I've been involved in a very successful company, Stevenson Hunt, as its president. And we've had significant growth as president, and we became one of the largest independent insurance brokers in the country. In addition to that, we have several small retail shops that are family run, and I'm proud to be part of that. From a political standpoint, I've been involved as a member of parliament and 2 years as Minister of Science and Technology. And in that regard, I've certainly come to appreciate the importance of municipalities needing the support of the provincial and federal governments, because no one can do it alone. And the final part is my relationship in terms of this community, where I've been involved in some 40 different community organizations, led many of them, helped raise millions of dollars with great teams for those less able to take care of themselves. And it's those components of business and political and community service that I hope you believe will serve London well in my capacity as mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Next up is Tanya Park.
Thank you. Over the last 4 years, I've been a proud advocate for downtown London as a city councillor for Ward 13. I've worked hard to ensure that we have growth and development in our community with our council colleagues. We've seen over $1 billion in development in our community for each and every year of our term of council. We've paid down our debt by over 10%, and we've continued to build a strong economy here in London. We have seen our unemployment rate to the lowest point it has been in over a decade. And not everyone is sharing in that prosperity. And I'm very focused on ensuring that we make sure no Londoner is left behind.
Thank you, Tanya. And Paul Pilato.
Good day, London. I'm Paul Pilato. I'm running for mayor, and I want to begin by thanking our host, the Blackburn Radio Group. We're delighted to be here yet again. I'm running for mayor for the simple reason that I think London is better than it has become. This city has some glorious opportunities before it, a wonderful geography, knowledge assets, cultural assets, and wonderful natural resources. Yet we seem to be struggling with some very, very difficult challenges. 1/3 of all working-age Londoners are without a full-time job, and some 21,000 of our fellow citizens are struggling with and on social assistance. We have a lot of challenges around transportation. We're struggling with isolation. We're struggling with a lot of things where people feel uncertainty. Wage increases have not kept up with tax increases, and people right now are having a hard time across the city. But yet I think there are opportunities to do well, and I think I'm well suited to provide those opportunities. My wife and I came here 18 years ago. We've raised our family. We've benefited greatly from living in London. My kids have participated in cultural events and sports events and have had a wonderful upbringing, and now they're young adults, and we're very proud of them. I have worked behind the scenes in the community as the Police Services Board budget chair, as well as on various community organizations like economic development and our hospital foundations. From a business perspective, I have been the senior executive for nearly a dozen companies, largely specializing in restructuring and refreshing organizations. I know how to build a team, and I know how to get things done. And that's why I'm stepping forward now to serve you, the City of London, in a public capacity as somebody on a full-time basis. Because I think London is better than it has become, and I want to make it that way, much better than it is now.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to move on now to the first of the four issues that we'll be discussing today. And what better topic to begin with than the one that is arguably the most important one of the election, and that's jobs and the economy. We're going to start with you, Mr. Pilato. Our economy and how the city can do better when it comes to job creation is going to be the focus of this question. So as we know, London's economy has struggled a bit over the past number of years. We have seen and continue to see concerns about our workforce participation rate and the amount of job creation that we've seen compared to other Canadian cities that are of similar size. You say in your platform that you aim to attract $5 billion of new investment over 4 years. How would your efforts differ from what has already been done by the current council?
Well, the nice thing about the last little run rate has been that the economy has done better than $1 billion over the last couple of years, but it's been largely driven by a housing and development market. That housing and development market and some of the drivers behind it are not something that anybody believes will be sustained, particularly as we look at the U.S. and international markets and the growing contraction in our economy. My objective is to try and nevertheless proceed with some level of higher level investment, because the way I look at it is that the current council has done it despite themselves, rather than in support of the business climate in our community. And from my perspective, I think we can do a lot better. Small business and large business are largely not respected in London, and I hear that all the time. And in fact, when you look at the number of supporters who have provided financial support to my campaign, they've all been driven by a need to try and improve the business climate, reduce regulation, improve respect, improve processes, streamline processes, improve the movement of working capital, make business feel welcome. I think we can do a lot better, and that's the reason I proposed what I proposed, and I've laid out a detailed plan on how I hope to go about getting those dollars into the community and the jobs that are associated with it.
Councillor Park, I'd like you to respond first, because you, of course, are the person who has served on this current council. So I'd like you to maybe respond to what Mr. Pilato has said, and also offer your vision of how we can do better in the next term.
I can speak to this term of council, but I also want to reflect on the previous council. They had a very disjointed view on economic development in our community. They were also kind of undercutting the work of the contracted organization, LEDC, that was to do all that work. So it was almost this disjointed thing, and it was this council that brought it all together to streamline that. London Economic Development Corporation, the relationship that we have with them, they have not seen a contract increase in over 10 years, yet they're still punching above their weight despite that modest budget that they have. We've seen some jobs leaving that corporation, so I think it's important that we look at that relationship and give them the resources that they need to continue to attract the businesses, and that we retain the talent here in our community. We know that there's a huge deficit when it comes to the skilled trades in our community. I want to work with Fanshawe and the other trades organizations in our community, and also work with the provincial government to address the issues that we're having with the ratios when it comes to internships and apprenticeships. I think it's important that we have those conversations with labor, because I know that they have deep concerns about those ratios being moved, but I think it benefits everyone when we have more people that are trained and ready to work.
Mr. Holder, is there something to be said about, let's call it the loss of really good middle class paying jobs? Some of those auto jobs that we've seen in generations past, we don't necessarily see those anymore. We see a lot of auto jobs and other manufacturing jobs that are paying $15, $16 an hour. Is there anything that can be done at a municipal level, and if so, what are your thoughts on that can attract some of those higher paying jobs that we have had in the past but don't seem to have a lot of anymore?
Well, thanks for the question, Scott. I think what is important is that the role of the mayor, and I know my colleagues at this table would agree, is the importance of being able to attract industry to London. What I believe I bring in my capacity of having sat on the International Trade Committee for 5 years in my time in Ottawa as an MP is not only just appreciating but understanding, making connections internationally with companies that can come to London. And we all know that it's a very competitive process when you want to bring businesses to London. We see that when Dr. Edgar came here in the cakery. When companies like this come to London, it's just not an automatic. You need federal, you need provincial support. I have those relationships and connections with it, which I think will help matter when we want to draw those people to London, which means significant jobs to our community. Paul made a comment, and he's quite right, about the state of jobs in our city. I think we have to be very mindful. We've got a high youth unemployment rate. We want to be able to match skills that are needed by employers with the workforce that's here. It's the way that you're going to keep people from our college and university in London, Ontario. But you do that by supporting local business that's here, because those are really sustainable, important businesses. Might I say, beyond a comment that was made from a friend who's not here today, that even a muffin shop and the other 2,200 retail shops that are here in London, Ontario, that those matter to London's economy, as do those companies that we will attract by bringing our federal and provincial colleagues to bear to help us make that happen. I have those connections, I believe, that will help make that work for London, and for that sake, that will mean good and meaningful paying jobs.
Is there something to be said, Paul, about the performance of city officials when it comes to getting some of those businesses to come to London, that we've missed out on? I mean, we often think of Toyota being the big one. Why isn't Toyota in London? Why isn't it in Woodstock? And I'll pose this question to all three of you. I mean, it's looking in the rearview mirror a little bit, but it kind of speaks to a greater conversation. How did we miss out on Toyota, and how do we prevent that from happening again? Let's start with you, Councillor Park.
Sure. So that happened prior to this term of council. But what we didn't have in place was an industrial land development strategy, which serviced land for proponents that want to invest here in our community. Having done a lot of work on that front over this term of council, we have sold more land to potential businesses in our community than the previous council on that. So what we have to do is make sure that we're setting the climate, that we have shovel-ready ground for organizations such as Toyota. Hopefully they want to expand and come back here to London, or anybody else for that matter, but we have to make sure that we have the climate set and make sure that we have shovel-ready ground for them.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Holder, the same question to you.
Well, that may be true about Toyota, but I would ask the question about Cisco, and I come back and say, why should companies that will offer employment to several hundred employees and provide a corporate property tax base to London go somewhere else like the 401 and 403 area? They should be in London, Ontario, and that's important that we make that commitment. Look, here's what we need to do. We need to work with the LEDC. And what's really important, that when those presentations are made as we compete for business in our city, that the mayor be at the table for those major presentations and say, I want to do business with you. There's a company that applied for a permit in a neighboring municipality, and as he applied for that permit to open up business there, received a note from the mayor of that municipality that said, thanks for considering our community to do business here. I think part of it's attitudinal. I think the LEDC does a good job. I think that what we as a council and the mayor has to do is support that strongly and be the number one salesperson for London in the international business community, and that would be my role. And
to you, Mr. Pilato, the last word on this question.
Well, I think the economic roadmap was a classic example of a lack of leadership, and I know Tanya walked away from it for the reasons that I walked away from it, which was that this was a mass effort by a bunch of people, which unfortunately never got the level of support and never had the attached accountability with it. My position has been very clear. I've laid out a very clear economic plan. I know how I want to accomplish it. I know how I want to accomplish it, and I know who I want to accomplish it with. The key thing from my perspective is the mayor needs to take a responsibility for this file, and they need to be held accountable. They need to hold those in the field accountable for the jobs and for the various responsibilities that they're assigned, and they need to be supported. And then more importantly, the community and the council need to hold the mayor accountable. I'm prepared to take that role on. I think it's that critical that we change the attitude, as Ed said, and start focusing our community on making job creation a priority, and that the business community matters much more than it has in the past.
Okay, thank you, candidates, for your answers. We're going to move on to the second topic of discussion today, and fair to say, probably one of the more contentious ones of the campaign, and that, of course, is bus rapid transit. Councillor Park, I think it's probably fair to say that of everyone sitting at this table here today, you are the most supportive of the bus rapid transit plan. So my question, questions to you are, can the current BRT plan be made better? And how would you, as mayor, address the concerns that have been raised by opponents of the plan, specifically that it's too expensive, that construction will be too disruptive, and that the rail crossing at Richmond, just outside our studios here, will make a rapid transit plan not so rapid?
Right, so there's a lot I could say on that and a lot I will say on that. When we talk about infrastructure work in our community, we know that there's huge work that has to be done over the next 10 years to make sure we're getting rid of our combined storm and waste water, because anytime we have a significant rain event, we're dumping raw sewage into the Thames. So we need to make sure that when we dig a road up, we only do it once, so that we're getting the best bang for our buck. Over the last 10 years, the LTC and the City Hall, and it's been a few different councils, have worked together to create a plan for transit in our community. The fact of the matter is, London Transit Commission right now is only on time about 52% of the time. So that doesn't work for people who are trying to get to work, get their kids to school, get to the grocery store, or whatever they're trying to do. So we're trying to expand the business of public transit in our community, because right now it's busting at the seams. And in any line of business, you look to where the growth opportunities are and you expand just like that. I'm very sensitive to the impacts of construction on any project when it comes to neighborhoods, when it comes to our downtown and our business sectors. And that's exactly why I worked throughout this process to ensure that we protected the loading zones around the Budweiser Gardens and Covent Garden Market, that I worked hard to get that couplet in place. I worked hard to get rid of that tunnel, because there was a lot of concern about how 3 years of construction was going to impact our business community over here on Richmond Row. I also think it's important that any grade separation is an equitable separation. That separation was only for buses. So I think that we need to re-examine Richmond Street or other alternatives at the rail crossings there. But it's funny to note that there's more than 2 roads in London. It's not just Richmond and it's not just Adelaide. Even last night, I got a picture from a friend of mine who was a passenger in a car on Richmond Street and under a train track and saying, I'm basically in a parking lot. Rail separations aren't going to help me get out of this congestion right here. So this plan is about looking forward for the next 30 years and making sure we get this right. So any opportunities that are opportunities to make this better for our community, I'm wide open to that. I want to create a community improvement plan so we can walk with our business community when we're doing really big projects like this, because it's important that they have the support of City Hall. And I'm very, very dismayed to hear that they feel like they're not respected. It is City Hall's job to create the climate for business, but not necessarily to walk them through operating their own business.
Let's start with you, Mr. Pilato, on the, I guess we'd call it the rebuttal. But I wanted to ask first, the proponents of BRT have said, look, the province is coming to the table with money, the feds are coming to the table with money. This isn't just about rapid transit, it's about road improvements, and as Councillor Park said, things like sewer improvements. We only want to do these things once. So why not? Why not this plan?
Well, I've been very clear that I do not support the bus rapid transit plan, largely because it is too costly, too disruptive, and too risky. And I have very little confidence in the assumptions that went into the plan, largely because you can't find anything that supports them. I'm also concerned about the fact that there are 2 teams. We have an LTC and we have a Shift BRT team, and very little interaction. Despite all of this engagement that people talk about, bus drivers were never consulted. The LTC leadership was never consulted. This is, in my view, a big problem with the core plan. And the assumptions actually played to a Metrolinx Ontario government analysis basis, instead of looking at what it would be the impacts to the local taxpayers. So I'm very much in favor of taking the money, which now has, I guess, been unencumbered by Shift BRT, and putting it towards transit and infrastructure as per the plan. And I want to pull out the best pieces of Shift BRT because there are elements that do make sense in terms of helping all mobility, road widening of intersections, traffic light synchronization, improved bus lanes, traffic prioritization. There are elements of the plan that can be salvaged because we've already spent a boatload of money on it. And so that's going to be my perspective going forward. Conduct a cost analysis so that people truly understand what this thing is going to cost the taxpayer over a period of time. And then the second piece is to see what elements we can keep and then build on it so that when the ridership is in place and other elements are in place, then we can start to explore more ambitious plans. But right now, the goals of this plan are not being met by the actual implementation because they have failed to maintain flexibility, adaptability, and operational integrity.
Okay, Councillor Park, I saw you out of the corner of my eye shaking your head, so I want to come back to you in just a moment to address some of those things. But I'd like to get Mr. Holder in first to answer, I guess, the same question that was posed to Mr. Pilato. Why not this plan? I mean, if what supporters are saying is true, that there has been considerable engagement, considerable consultation, there is money on the table from upper levels of government, why not go forward with what we have?
Well, I think if you ask the businesses on Richmond Street and residents farther north and throughout the Wellington Road area about the level of consultation, they might take a different view. Here's what's interesting. Respectfully to Councillor Park when she says it isn't just about Richmond Street or just about Adelaide Street. Well, it is. It is about the businesses that are going to be destroyed as a result of this, and they will be. Having been in business for as long as I have, you take a business that has been there with the kind of with the kind of construction that we're talking about in major street areas. You do it for 10 years, and by the way, having been also in politics, when they say 10 years, that means at least 10 years. And when it's $500 million, it's at least $500 million. The devastating effect on business will be such that many of those businesses will not come back. That's not gloom and doom. That's just the reality of business. The second component of that is homes. I mean, we just heard this past week of 67 homes that have been declared as heritage that are either going to be partially destroyed, potentially fully taken down. Serious impacts in our community that had not been acknowledged. People say that means that the plan's working, but I would say to you, why did it take 117 days out of a 120-day process for that to finally be uncovered? That to me comes back to initial planning. Paul's right in so many respects of this, that it's too expensive, takes too long, it's not predictable. You've got lanes that are fixed lanes that will have an impact on our community. And I look at this and say we will not be impeding, and I think it's been very clear from the federal and provincial governments, will not be impeding the monies that we will need to grow London in terms of its transportation, which needs to be a transportation policy for all.
Okay, Councillor Park, let's have you respond to some of the things that that both Mr. Pilato and Mr. Holder have said. Go ahead.
So anytime a municipality wants to seek dollars from other levels of government, you don't get them unless you have a business case and a business plan. And those things have been done, and they've been well received. We've heard very positive remarks from the minister, from the federal level and the provincial level about this plan. In fact, Doug Ford, so much as at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, in front of leaders across Ontario, talked very positively about rapid transit in London and making sure that their government would be putting Ontarians to work building systems just like this. I think it's also important to recognize that we are going to be under construction here in London over the next 10 years, and it's going to be the work of digging up all of our old sewers and those sorts of things, and that's very disruptive. That work's happening whether we like bus rapid transit or not. So at the end of the day, do we just want better asphalt on our streets, or do we want a better transit system that's reliable? Because right now, London transit system is not reliable. The only way to add that reliability is to have dedicated lanes, so we're pulling buses out of the way of cars and cars out of the way of buses. That is critically important. To the notes about the heritage impacts that were brought up this past week, as a person that's been on the Planning and Environment Committee, we have two lists. We have the designated lists of heritage properties, we have the inventory of heritage resources, and then there's every other house in our community. What this provincial government has asked us to do is let's talk about all the houses that are now 40 years and older, which are on that potential to be designated. So that's where that's all coming from. It's just getting some more research about what buildings might be impacted, and there's no way it's going to be every single one. That would just not work here in our community. As someone who's been on the Planning and Environment Committee, I've fought tooth and nail to save a lot of heritage in our community, and I'm going to continue to do that. Again, I'm wide open to making this plan better and more adaptable to the neighborhoods surrounding it.
Okay, candidates, thank you. We probably could talk bus rapid transit all day, but we do need to move on because there are other issues in this campaign, of course. And that brings us to our third issue, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Holder. It is no secret that this city, like many others, is in the throes of an addiction crisis, particularly when it comes to opiates. The number of people in our community living with addictions to opiates and other drugs is in the thousands. There's estimates that even strictly when we look at people who are using injection drugs, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000. So obviously it's a huge concern for our community. The Middlesex London Health Unit and the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection have been doing, I would argue, the work of angels in trying to address this with the temporary overdose prevention site. People are given the opportunity to consume narcotics in a supervised environment so that in the event of overdose, their lives can be saved. And they can be perhaps directed toward rehabilitation and getting off of the substances that they're on. So as we know, the health unit is hoping to set up a permanent supervised consumption site to replace the temporary site. As mayor, how would you respond to citizens who might say, not in my backyard?
Well, that certainly has, been an issue in terms of where those sites, permanent sites, would be placed. But let's back it up just a little bit. Let's talk about why there's a need at all. I think you articulated well some of the background, and in having a number of discussions with Dr. Mackey, our Middlesex London Medical Officer of Health. I'm absolutely convinced that the medical evidence is clear as to why we need to have permanent site. Why is that? Number one, what it does do is it saves lives. It's really clear. That temporary site that we have now has already been in action and saved, as per current circumstances, some 37 lives. They brought those people back to life. Secondly, and that's in that supervised series of rooms that they have on King Street. Second thing is that a supervised consumption site, what it does is it stops the spread of HIV and hepatitis C. And thirdly, that it actually saves money. Did you know that the full extended cost of someone with HIV/AIDS costs $1.3 million? The cost for a permanent injection site annually is $1.2 million. You save one person and prevent them from getting AIDS, and that's the kind of money that you'll save. And frankly, I think it's one of those things that it's also the humanitarian thing to do. So here's what's missing. What's missing on the other side of this is a wraparound facility where we take those individuals. Currently at the temporary site, what you have is you have counselors standing by. You don't get that same level of service with a mobile site, but what you've got with a permanent facility that also has a rehabilitation component to it is you have that ability to take these people, be it mental health, be it with drug addictions, and you've got a facility for them to go to. When the police try to look at someone who's got problems on the street, they don't have a place to take them. And what I'm proposing that in addition to the safe consumption sites, that we also have a permanent wraparound facility to take care of those most in need.
So where would that site go?
Well, that would be, I looked today at the facility potential at Oxford and Highbury. I know there's some redevelopment going on currently in terms of some of that land that's currently for sale. But I look at those great buildings there, and this is why you need to have the federal and provincial governments, and in particular the provincial government, working with you, because you can't do it alone. And for us to imagine that we can just do it by ourselves, that's too difficult for us to do. But if the issue is how do you find the money for the standpoint of the site itself, the temporary or a permanent site, listen, we'll find the money. But I think when it comes to having a wraparound facility that is broader in scope and depth and caring for those who are not able to take care of themselves, that's where you need that kind of a facility like they have at Oxford and Highbury.
Let me go to you next, Mr. Pilato, because you have not been quite as I guess supportive of the idea of a permanent site. You have talked, I think, about preferring more of a mobile facility. How would that work exactly? Because there are concerns about whether or not those who need the facility would know where to find it.
Well, first of all, let me start by pointing out that I agree the characterization of the people at TOPS are like a work of angels. So I've toured TOPS, I've toured all of our public housing and social housing facilities. I've been to numerous hotspots that are kind of right now assembly points for the drug culture throughout our community. It is not all centered in the core, and it is definitely not all centered in Soho, and it's definitely not all centered in our public housing units. So let me start with that. The second thing that's really important is because of the fact that the drug culture is traversed throughout the city, 5,000, 6,000 addicts. They're spread out through the city, and they move. And what I mean by move is they move in accordance with drug changes in the culture. It moves with changes in what they're consuming. It moves with where the dealers are, that kind of thing. The last thing I want to do is go through an elongated process of zoning and creating a permanent site somewhere that becomes antiquated, and worse yet, impacts the neighborhoods in which it's placed. So that's why I'm pushing for mobile. I'm trying to figure out the best way to deliver the service to the broadest audience without impacting neighborhoods, and finding that very site itself is antiquated. The other thing that's really important, and it's great to hear Ed coming around on this one, is around the complete care facility, because I've been advocating this since the start of this process. And the reason is because we do not have enough rehab and detoxification services, particularly for for women and youth in our community. We need to put in place a complete care facility so that we have the place for people to go and help get them off the drug and begin a recovery process. That includes temp housing or hostels, that includes counseling, and that includes clinical care. My ideal site is around the hospital lands, because they're trained to be able to accommodate these needs and be in a position where they're not being intrusive to neighborhoods, giving them an environment where they can start to get well. But the whole thing begins with a mobile injection service that is accommodating to the drug culture. It allows it to disperse it 24/7. We don't have to get into the zoning issues and some of those other challenges. It provides ambulatory care. It provides additional care if we need to move people to a complete care facility. I think it's a very effective solution for London, and that's why I'm pushing so hard.
Councillor Park, is that a reasonable position to take, that a mobile facility would be better because the people who are in need of it are spread out throughout the city? Is that?
Yeah, so on this issue in particular, this is something I've been working on over the last 2 years. I was a participant in the research that was happening in our community as the representative of Ward 13, where it is the hot button area in terms of where these uses are happening. And to the people in our community that don't want this in their backyard, it's already in our backyard, uncontrolled. We have unsupervised consumption sites in every park, alleyway, business, bathroom, everywhere. So supervised consumption sites is a way of bringing that behavior inside, so to make sure we have compassionate services to everyone. When we talk about the mobile sites, I'm very concerned about how are people actually going to find them, because not everyone has a cell phone or a mobile app to be able to find mobile services. And also within the mobile services, you don't have enough room in them to wrap your arms to give that wraparound service to individuals who need it. When I talk to the Chief Medical Officer of Health, they need a permanent site associated with a temporary site. So can they all work together? Absolutely. But one in particular won't work on its own. And to shove this into the hospital realm, we know we're already dealing with hospital or hallway medicine, and I don't see this as anything that's going to help that at all. I'm glad that Ed is talking about the economics of it, because sometimes that's what you need to talk about when it comes to social issues, to get people to understand how the impacts on a human being's life also impacts our economy.
Just to take this discussion a little wider, and none of us here is a doctor or an epidemiologist or anything like that, but there's certainly something to be said about the root causes of addiction, and trying to address the problem at that end rather than trying to address it at the back end, which is what we're doing now. Is there any municipal role in that? I mean, we talk primarily about the effects of childhood trauma as it pertains to addiction. Is there anything in your mind that a municipality can do about that? Let's start with you, Mr. Holder.
Thanks very much. I think that when you talk about whether we are there at the complete care or the wraparound component, which I've always advocated, or at the other end where we take care of addicts at the very base level, municipality has a huge role to play. That's why the temporary consumption site, which has served some 8,000 visits already since February, that's dramatic. So you have to take care of the whole component. But to imagine that you can do this by yourself is not possible. You need to have provincial support to be able to make this work. Would we like to be able to go it alone? Here's the reality. No municipality, when you're looking at full care facility, would be able to do that. And just as a comment from before, the notion that a permanent site would, the concern would be is that it would become antiquated. That makes no sense to me, because I think that's a function of the support that any site would get from our community, as well as the funding that we get supported locally as well as provincially and with federal support as well. So from my standpoint, what you have to look at is what are we doing? We're looking at the base level. The most humanistic thing that we can do is to save a life. Then once we've done that, we take the next steps to, as best we can, to get them better.
Same question, Councillor Park. Is there anything that a municipality can do to address some of those root causes of addiction in order to, perhaps alleviate the pressures that we're feeling on the back end of things?
Yeah, so one of the things we've done over this term of council is we've created a mental health and addiction strategy for our community. And the bulk of that work was to set the table for community agencies that deal with these populations and work with them in a very human way, to talk about where the broad issues are. Because sometimes even in the social service sector, if you don't have the full awareness of who's doing what, there's a duplication of effort. So Councillor Van Holst has been our representative from the City Council on this, and it's been a really good opportunity to get agencies together talking about how we are walking toward the same path. so that we're not duplicating effort, so that we're sharing resources to address these significant issues in our community. And that's exactly what the municipality's job is, to bring everyone together to focus on one issue, one outcome.
Mr. Pilato, same question.
Well, just that I'm back to the issue around permanent versus mobile and the nuance around that. I think everybody's trying to figure out the best way to solve the problem. The biggest challenge for me is that the current solution that's being tabled negatively impacts neighborhoods. To pretend that it doesn't is folly. And the reason I say that is because if there is a neighborhood that's prepared to round up the neighbors and say, look, we're prepared to host one of these sites, I'm welcome to it. I mean, I'm not going to stop that process, but I do know investment is being held back, property values are being impacted, and I'm not entirely sure the trade is worth it. And the reason I know that is because people say, well, okay, I'm very much in favor of the site until I find out it's next door to me. Because there are consequences, there are ancillary consequences, and that's one of the problems with this process. So we're trying to find a way to accommodate and save lives, and do so in as an economically manner as possible. But we have to be mindful of all constituents in this situation, and that's why I'm trying to find a solution. And by the way, it's very important to note, I think the health unit and Dr. Mackey's budget is woefully under-resourced here. These people are working very long hours. They're trying to make it work, but it's only 9 to 5, so the accommodation that they're providing to the marketplace is inadequate. And the reason is because there's just not enough dollars being allocated. So part of my job is to, one, find the dollars in the municipality, because we can't always use the province and the feds to be the crutch. And then two, beat on the door at Queen's Park and wherever else we can to find money to support this initiative. The fact that somebody doesn't like something isn't going to make the problem go away. And the consequences to our community are very, very high across the board. So my job as mayor is to make sure that Dr. Mackey and his team have the resources they need to service this problem properly. And that means a combination, fine. But I'm advocating a process that does not impact or impose undue hardship on neighbors and businesses and children and those families.
Okay, and we've been joined by Paul Cheng. Mr. Cheng, we've been talking about in this segment of the debate the supervised consumption site and the move from a temporary site to a permanent one. And the question was, how, as mayor, would you address concerns from people who would say, I don't want this in my backyard? How would you, as mayor, confront that question?
Thank you. First of all, my apologies for being late. No excuse. I did not mark it on my day book. I was just working in the backyard cleaning it up, and a neighbor came over, and I had my phone off. My neighbor came over and said, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be on radio?" I forgot all about it, so I ran down here. Anyways, as I mentioned 4 years ago, I wanted our high school free of drugs, but that was a provincial issue, and the media just said, "Paul, that's a provincial issue. You don't know what you're talking about." So it came back to bite us now. It is on King Street. Leave it there. To move it would be even more chaos. I want a complete holistic system. I understand as a slice, you have an addiction problem, but it has to be treatment at the end. We do need the province involved with money. It cannot just be a London Kitchener issue. It has to be province-wide. So that's my position.
Okay, and that takes us to our final topic of today's debate, and that is affordable housing. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Cheng, on this. I don't think that anyone at this table is going to argue that we have enough affordable housing in London. There are still waiting lists and for some people, affordable housing is just out of reach. That's just the reality for some people. If you were elected mayor, how would you address our affordable housing challenges?
I have spoken with our developers. They want to help. We had a system here in the 1960s and 70s. The developers was involved. They want to help a fellow person in need. But what they were tired of was the bureaucracy. People in City Hall and the provincial keeps getting involved further and further. They got tired of it and they says, we got better money, easier money to make elsewhere. So they backed out. But there are excess land in London. We can dedicate it, but we need a clear direction. What it is we want, what it is we expect from them, and let them do it.
Councillor Park, since you are on council this term, I'll put this question to you next. What can we do? What would you do as mayor to address this issue that we have in the city?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that there's different models of housing. There's market rent, there's affordable housing, and social housing. And we don't have enough of the social housing, we don't have enough of the affordable housing, and there's not enough people that can afford market rent in our community right now. So it puts a significant pressure point on the affordability of housing in our community. Over this term of council, what we did is we've directed staff to begin the work on inclusionary zoning in our community. And it's important that we make sure that we walk with the development community on this point, because I don't think it's going to work if we force a number of inclusionary zoning numbers of units in developments like that, but we need to make sure that we're addressing the situation, because if we have to make sure that we also have incentive programs to actually pay for these units. So I want to create a community improvement plan that has the same mechanisms, the same tools as in the downtown community improvement plan, where we're waiving development charges on projects like this, where we would be seeing an increase in affordable housing. I think it's also important that we make sure that we have a stock across the city, not necessarily focused in particular areas where we're stigmatizing buildings, or even, I want it so someone can say, I live in that building, and you don't know whether they're an affordable unit or not, because I think that that's really important. It gives dignity to life and also a bit of privacy, which is important for people. I think the use of community improvement plans is a good incentive tool. I think also making sure that we have a roundtable with our development community, because I know that they're willing partners to work on this. We have some really outstanding members in that development community that have done great work when it comes to social housing, and I can't wait to see the work that they will do on affordable housing in our community.
Okay. Mr. Pilato, to you.
Well, Tanya said a lot of the things that I think are very laudable. I like the attitudes and the approach on exclusion, so I'm not going to repeat those. The three areas I think we can do make material improvements is one is around our processes. We're very, very slow and our processes are cumbersome. That means the working capital is constantly being tied up by these developers, which means that they're not able to put in place affordable housing simply because that cost of capital has to be recovered somehow. The second area of opportunity is around inventory. We need to expand our inventory. The fact that we have low inventories is creating price escalation in the market, and I hear this all the time, and so we've got to get this shovel-ready land made available much faster, again, because we have to move at the speed of business and at the speed of the market, otherwise the market's going to pass us by. And the third area is around finding some additional capital in the community. I'm very interested in exploring opportunities with pension funds. I think they represent sources of patient and less expensive capital. We're never going to be able to pay for all of our social housing challenges, for example. The stock is 3,500 units, and they're all very tired and in dire need of repair. We have, in addition to those 35, a need for 3,000 more. So we're going to have to find what I would consider less expensive sources of patient capital to be able to start working through that process, improving those facilities, and restoring, as Tanya said, some dignity to the lives of the people who are seeking out these types of housing options.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Holder.
I think there are three things you have to consider. Firstly, we have to acknowledge the crisis that it truly is. The second thing that we need to do is determine where the funding is going to come from to do this. And finally, locations where we would provide affordable housing. Look, there's some 3,500 people on the affordable housing waiting list in London. That's absolutely a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that, from their standpoint, without a home, you have no dignity. I've been active with the Habitat for Humanity for a number of years, providing funding through the federal government, but also being active with them as an organization. They do great work, one home at a time, and that's wonderful for all those individuals that are beneficiaries of that. And I applaud what Habitat for Humanity does. At the broader level, in terms of affordable housing, recognizing there's a crisis, you say, well, how do we pay for that? Well, when I was federal member of Parliament, one of the things that we did was we provided federal funding to build new affordable housing in London to support what London was doing. The second thing is that, and this is a side that sometimes gets missed, a home that's impacted over a number of years, frankly, needs to be rehabilitated, it needs renovations, it needs to be worked on, and we provided some support there. All to say that you must have a federal government and a provincial government that are going to work hand in hand with the local government to be able to ensure that not only that there are the appropriate builds, but there are also that there's the funding and mechanism in place. And you can't do that as well unless you've got the support of our real estate developers as well. They play a big, big role in this. So that really comes down to, well, then where are you going to put these places? And there's a lot of talk in terms of provincial legislation about supporting affordable housing. One of the components that I see is that we've got schools that have been considered excess inventory. We've got city lands where that might be possible as well, but working in conjunction with real estate developers and builders, I think we could come together and as it has been the case already, where currently the development industry as well as the London's planning department are working at this time to come up with a plan that's appropriate and fair. And I would support that. So the three things are again, the most important thing. Acknowledging the crisis. Secondly, where's the funding coming from? And then finally, what are those locations where we can support those 3,500 people on the waiting list?
All right, candidates, this brings an end to our debate today. I want to thank each of you for not just coming in today, but also for putting your names forward for election. It takes sacrifice, as I'm sure the four of you know. It takes sacrifice to run and to serve in office, and I think each of you should be commended for that. So thanks to all four of you. It's greatly appreciated. And to the voters, make sure that you get out and vote. There is no level of government that has more of a direct impact on your daily life than that of the municipal level. The election is on October 22nd, and I would encourage you to learn as much as you can about the platforms of the candidates in your ward, not just the council candidates, but also school board, and of course, of those who are running for mayor. I sound like I'm lecturing here, don't I? It's not my intention, believe me. But again, learn as much as you can about the people who are running, and I hope that we have helped in some small way doing that today. Thank you very much for watching, and again, candidates, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.